I'm happy to bring on this next guest. I have to admit to him that Shayne just left, so that's probably the reason he joined the show. I've been trying to get him on my show for about a year and a half, and I wasn't able to do that. And then I suckered him in by the Shayne Graham title, and now Shayne just left. So my apologies to Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit, who was probably excited to talk to the former Pro Bowl kicker, but he's stuck with the former JV backup lineman from East Grand Rapids. So welcome to the show, Erik.
You know, you got me when you came on our charity stream. That's really what it was. All due respect to Shayne, I came to talk to you, Ryan. I'm happy to be on and join you.
I appreciate it. That's a great. I'm glad you highlighted that because we did do a crossover with the Movember campaign because it's a great thing that you guys do at Pride of Detroit, and I was happy to be part of it. Honored to be a part of it because I mean I was the warm up act for I think Lomas Brown or Herman Moore. There was somebody big follow me, so I'm sure they were like, well, who's this guy wearing a Jerry Ball jersey? And then they brought on the real the real headliners after me.
Yeah, it's a cool thing that we get a chance to do, and it's always nice whenever anybody gives us time.
Definitely, yeah, and we'll be doing more crossovers with you guys, especially if you do it again next year. And we'll be having, as fans of the show know, we've had pretty much everybody from Pride of Detroit. I might have Erik help me get the couple people that we haven't had to feature them, but they're all great. We've had Ryan Matthews, Jeremy Reisman, Morgan Cannon. We had Al Karsten on recently. So I'm happy to get Erik on because he's got a wealth of knowledge about not only the Lions' history and he's been on the beat for a long time, but this is a good time to bring him on because there's a lot going on in the draft cycle. And since we have now a full-time football show where we can really dive into the offseason, this is the guy to talk to. So I'm curious, I saw you and Al had a good article about some standouts, some people to watch. So I'm curious, I think that was for the East-West Shrine game, but I'm sure you're going to do that for the Senior Bowl, and you're all on the beat of these different warm-up processes, including the Combine and the lead up to the season. But I'm curious who you have your eye on as you kind of build out not only the draft and how that board's going to look for the Lions, but also who you know better than anybody who the Lions might have their eye on as far as the archetypes go. So I'm curious to highlight some of those people from the article and otherwise.
Yeah, we will. We're going to have another article on the Senior Bowl coming up. It should come out. We're aiming for Friday. If it leaks over into Saturday morning, it'll still be out plenty of time to read before the game on Saturday afternoon. But we've tried to find the type of guys that the Lions are looking at, right? Because there's going to be a lot of talented players at all these events that you were alluding to, and finding which ones fit the Lions scheme, it can be a bit of a challenge at times. And so we try to, eliminate some of the guesswork for some of the readers and point to some guys that either stylistically fit or physically match some of the stuff that the Lions have targeted in the past. And so we'll put up articles as we go. Like you pointed out, we did one ahead of the Shrine game. Al and I will have another one ahead of the Senior Bowl. We will do a position-by-position one leading up to the Combine, and then we'll do a results one after each day of the Combine as well, like one, how each position group performed and standouts that Lions fans should pay attention to. And then, you start building these collection of names and you're narrowing guys down, and you're slowly getting to work on your film. And, we got a little bit of a head start on it this year with the Lions not being in the playoffs. Usually we're scrambling quite a bit this time of year to try and get caught up with the draft stuff. But with a little bit of extra time, we've gotten a little bit of a jump on the game. And so, the way I work is I look at the positions that I'm projecting the Lions are most likely going to need from a long-term standpoint. Now, most analysts are going to look at the Lions and say, hey, this is what they need this year. But the way I try and look at it from a draft perspective is, who are they going to need in 26, 27, 28, right? Like, who are these guys that this is a position you need to solidify for multiple years? Because that's really how I believe Brad Holmes attacks it. And so those positions, I do think, line up with some of their needs in 2026, which are, like offensive tackle. They need to find a solution at center, and an edge rusher always seems to be a priority every offseason.
That's one of the things that I really like about your coverage, because I think fans sometimes have a hard time understanding, because fans like to fantasy book who they want for the team. They always want to go after the top guy of every position. They want to get Myles Garrett, and then they want to get Linderbaum at center, and those are reasonable ideas as far as, okay, you would want the best and the cream of the crop, but I always try to preach value. Okay, what are you getting for the value? Sure, it's great if you can get a Myles Garrett, but now you're going to have to pay him, and that's money that you could have allocated to somebody else, and you're under a budget, and that's how all of those things work. But the other part where I think they go a little awry is, I think you have to almost view this as an empath. You have to look at Brad Holmes and his history and what he looks for as far as the archetype at each position, and some of the traits that they like. He's got the famous shirt of traits that he doesn't necessarily go after. Then he drafted Isaac Tisla, so I don't know about that, but they do have a lot of archetypes and things they go after. And I think that to truly understand a Lions offseason and a Lions draft, you have to put yourself in that mindset and say, hey, you might want a quick defensive end off the edge that's a sack king, but that's historically not who the Lions have gone after. Does it mean they'll never go after it? Not necessarily, but it just might lean you towards maybe like a Misador or a Falk in the first round, rather than maybe some of the speed edge rushers that might work with other formats. Yeah,
like one of the best comparisons for that is there's a Texas A&M edge rusher, Cassius Howell. He's one of the best, like, pure burners off the edge. But he's only like 6'2", 250, which is light and shorter than typically what the Lions target. And then you add in the fact that he's not really as stout in setting the edge or against the run. And that is going to put him in a bucket that the Lions don't really have a position for, or at least not one that they're going to utilize a first-round pick on. Instead, like you said with the Misador, he's 6'3", 270. He can play the edge. He can play the 4-eye. He can play he can kick inside of the 3 on pass rushing downs. Like, he has a lot of positional range. You can stand him up if you needed to, just because he kind of has that range. And he's really good against the run. Now, you sacrifice a little bit of that edge rush pop, but overall, what he is really successful at are things that the Lions prioritize. And so, if you're just generally looking at, like, draft boards, you're almost on all of them, you're going to see Cassius Howell ranked ahead of Misador. But for the Lions, they're going to flip that because of the stylistic advantages that the Miami edge rusher brings to the table. And you're going to see that a lot on the edge, right? There's a couple other guys that just aren't going to fit them from a stylistic standpoint, even though they might be ranked a lot higher on the just kind of consensus boards that you see published throughout the mock draft community.
Exactly, and I remember reading an article, because I was actually at the college football playoff final, and so I was reading your preview as I was getting prepared for that, because I'm an Indiana grad, so I was there representing them, and it was cool. I was there in the Amazing. Antoine Randall days, so to kind of go back to that and think of his connection with the Lions. Obviously, he was a member of the coaching staff there and now in the Bears. But to think back to that era and think of where we got now, I couldn't resist the opportunity to go down there. But I enjoyed reading your preview because, there's a lot of players on both teams, and you did a good job highlighting them. Messidor is one of them. Obviously, Bain would be great. He's going to be graded pretty high in the draft. He's going to, by all likelihood, be gone by the Lions pick. But, I know they're not necessarily in the market for an early corner, but D'Angelo Pons screams a Detroit Lion to me, but it was fun to watch it from that perspective. These guys may be going to the Lions and then just see that experience, because I was at the 16th loss of the Lions in Green Bay, and now I was at this first 16th win for my college team. So it was full circle for me.
I tell you, I have one jersey in my closet that is not a Lions jersey, and it's Antoine Randall. I absolutely loved him. When he joined the Lions coaching staff, I was over the moon to get to talk to him. I loved what he did. I'm very jealous to get to see that. I'm a Michigan grad, so but I wasn't in person at that national championship game for them. So I'm jealous. It must have been a great time.
Well, as is clear by this interview, you're obviously smarter than me. That's why you got into Michigan. I had to get into a party school that wasn't good at football at the time. Thankfully, we were pretty good at basketball at that time. But I wouldn't have traded those years watching Randall L. for anything. I mean, he was one of the most impressive players, and this is including Barry Sanders, seeing him when I was young. Other than Barry, I can't really think of a more impressive football player that I saw play live.
Yeah, he's super fun, right? And then you get to see him in the Super Bowl. Like he's in the Super Bowl with Pittsburgh here in Detroit. Like it's a lot of full circle connections there. It's pretty cool.
I was excited to have him. I don't blame Ben Johnson for taking him to the Bears, but I would have liked to have seen him ascend through the ranks of the coaching staff. But I'm glad we got there, because we got to take a break. But I want to talk about the offensive coaching staff and some of the changes and potentially more changes that could happen, because the fan base has been very bipolar about how they've dealt with this here, because we had one addition and then everybody was kind of on one side of things, and then another brought that back up here. So I want to talk about the new additions and possible additions in the future here, or reuniting of coaches and staffs here. So we'll come back with Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit. Stick with us. You're listening to Shayne Graham's Extra Points on Jethro FM. Happy to come back here with Erik Schlitt of Pride of Detroit, having a good conversation with him about the Lions. And Dan and I were talking about it a little bit in the break, but it's just funny to me. We always preach patience on this show because we have a little bit longer arc on things. We don't necessarily like to go with the short term. We like to see the team building and all of those kinds of things. But when they hired Petzing, I was actually kind of low key a fan of the move, but I think you were on the same page with me on this from what I've read from some of your writing, that I was rooting for. I don't know who your kind of number one guy was, but I was rooting for Kafka for that position. And once it was just funny where everybody was kind of downing the Petzing hire. I think that was a little short-sighted. I think you got to look at the talent that he was managing and the situations he was managing in both gigs that he was in. But the same could be said for Kafka. I mean, that Lions game that we all saw firsthand, that he's doing trick plays where Jameis Winston is ending up in the end zone. I think there's something impressive about the level of talent compared to the level of execution and accomplishment for both of those guys. But to pull both of them, I really didn't think they would be able to draw Kafka with anything but an offensive coordinator role, because I talked about it on the show last week, but I mean, he was the interim head coach. That's often kind of a purgatory that we've established here historically in the NFL. But to get both of those guys, I think is a big win for Campbell and co.
Yeah, absolutely. When I listed my ideal candidates for the Lions offense coordinator opening, it was Kafka at the top of the list there. He was one of the first guys I wrote about. I talked a lot about essentially what you kind of alluded to there, where his performance against the Lions and how he changed things when he took over for the Giants, how they played more inspiring ball, and how aggressive he was as a coach. And it's interesting, if you look at some of the aggression numbers, I think most people often associate Dan as being the most aggressive coach in the NFL. Last year he was second, and it was Kafka who was first, actually. So the connection between the two stylistically, I think, from a mentality standpoint, it aligns in a lot of ways. And I think you can say the same thing about Petzing. He wasn't quite on my radar because he was an offensive coordinator. So I didn't know if his contract was up, if he would have had to. He was still. I thought if he was still under contract with Arizona, the Lions would have to get permission, and then nothing got leaked out about him. So he kind of wasn't on my radar just because it was a lateral move for him to go from one OC spot to another, and I think that was the case with a lot of people. Like, he just wasn't on their radar, and not a lot of people wrote about him because, you know, because it's difficult. You don't often see those lateral moves, and I really think he would have been more well received if people had that time. If it was leaked that he had, interviewed with the Lions, that Jared Goff was in meetings with him the weekend before he got hired, like, those things I think would have resonated more with the fan base, and it would allow them time to process the idea of Petzing instead of it just being like thrust upon them and their initial gut reactions being a little bit more negative. So with the Kafka thing, though, he was a name that was out there. Like I said, the connection makes a lot of sense, and they'll find a role for him. Exactly what it is, I think, is still a little bit, to be determined. If I had to make an assumption, it's interesting that, like David Shaw kind of came in with Morton, and so it would make sense that maybe he also exits with Morton, and if he does, that passing game coordinator role is open. At the same time, you also have Scotty Montgomery, who's interviewing for OC spots, and so maybe he's interested in the position, and so maybe then Kafka steps into his old role. There's a lot of different ways that they can go with how they utilize him, but I agree with you. Getting both coaches seems like a really massive win for Detroit. And stylistically, philosophically, I think they'll all mesh pretty well together based on what we know about them.
I've seen some reactions saying too many cooks in the kitchen and all of that. Yeah. I don't think that's the way. I think we've learned by this point that that's not the way that Campbell manages this team. He wants to be collaborative. He views it as a collaboration. And actually, Dan just showed me, apparently that was a Pride of Detroit article. I swear I didn't steal it from that, but it's a good reference. But no, it can be true, but I think it depends on your culture and your environment. That they're going to want to get input from everybody. Yeah, certainly. The front office works the same way as in the coaching staff. They build in redundancy plans, and then they build in overlapping plans as well. So what you have is coaches who don't just coach their spot, but there's some overlap with another position. And then you have in the front office coaches or scouts that are scouting one area, but then they overlap with another area and they do like a cross check. And this is all designed so that if you do lose a coach or you do lose a member of the front office, that you have at least some people that are familiar with what the position is, and you should be able to maintain while you're looking for a replacement. And then two, you get to know other people's what jobs and roles, and it gives you perspective, and then additionally, it's also creating a broader picture of how to either develop a player or scout a player, because it gives you more more perspectives on what the player can do. And so this redundancy and this cross check and this overlap that they have. This is something they've been doing for a while, and they have it set up in really like this hierarchy system of who reports to who, and so I don't buy the too many cooks in the kitchen either. I think the more
brilliant minds you have is the better opportunity you're going to have to be successful.
Exactly. And that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I saw you reference this on X, but I think the natural conclusion to draw, or theory to draw, question to draw, from the fact that Tanner Engstrand was let go from the Jets staff. Obviously, the Lions were happy with him, likely wanted to retain him, and I know he was in the mix for that offensive coordinator job. I'm curious where you kind of see him going, because he's going to be, I think, for somebody that really didn't get much of a shot. I mean, we're talking about what Petzing and Kafka had to work with, and you made a great reference to the fact that Kafka really – he improved that team with a much lower amount of talent. He had already lost Dart, Scadaboo, Neighbors was long gone by that point in the season, and he's doing these things with Tracy and Winston and a bunch of backups, and Engstrand's situation that he was dealing with the Jets was arguably even worse than that. And so I'm curious where you see him going, because I do think that there's two teams at least in the NFC North that may put in a call there.
Yeah, like he's got a connection with the Lions, of course. There's also a connection with Ben Johnson, and the two of them have worked together in the past pretty closely in developing game plans in Detroit, and so both of those create natural spots for him. But he's also worked with Jim Harbaugh twice, once in Michigan, once at San Diego. And so he could easily probably call up his, Jim and be like, hey, you got a spot for me with the Chargers. And so I don't think he's going to be short on opportunities at all. For the Lions, though, I certainly do expect them to reach out to him and say, hey, we're trying to find ways to work. We're trying to, fill this spot. This spot might be opening. We're interested in retaining you if you're interested in coming back.
I know they were talking about possibly the tight ends role, and like you said, there's going to be some shifting here. I always assumed that Kafka would end up in Shaw's role too, because a lot of this is tough. We want to jump to conclusions, but there's a lot that has to go through the process. But we kind of covered the coaching side, covered the draft side. I want to know what your kind of plan is for the rest of the off season, as far as, obviously there's a big part of this that we want to address all of the things in the draft, because that's the thing that we can go on PFF and do the mock draft simulator and make a bunch of ridiculous picks right now, especially as people are undervalued. But I'm curious what you kind of see the goal being in free agency, because a lot of these positions you got to kind of probably pair the two. Like you talk about center being a whole. Do they get a veteran center and then bring in maybe a younger center in the draft, or develop McLaughlin? We don't know what's going to happen with Decker yet. So there's a lot of things that are still developing with that side of things too. But I'm curious what you see as free agency priorities here, because I think we got to temper expectations. I think they're going to be aggressive, but not in the way that people want them to be. Not necessarily spending a boatload on Linderbaum. It's going to be aggressive in bringing some new bodies in that they think will fit those archetypes in the system we're talking about.
Yeah, to be honest, the off-season work is, from this point on, it's going to work in three stages. The first stage is going to be getting your salary cap right, and then free agency, and then the draft after that. But it all starts with the salary cap and how much money you're going to have to set aside for your season, to set aside for your draft class, and then how much do you have left over to spend in free agency. And the Lions have really done a good job of leaving leftover money to roll over, which to the following season, which helps their future cap as well. So the salary cap is, I think, the most misunderstood portion of the off season. But it's also the most important, because it drives so many decisions on why maybe Linderbaum isn't as easy of an acquisition for the Lions to make, because of the money that they need to allocate to other areas. So, right now where they sit, they're actually projected to have more money than what the cap allows, or more money spent than what the cap allows. But the cap's going to be adjusted. The Lions are going to have to make some contract renegotiations in order to free up some money. But they're not the only ones that are going to be doing this. All 4 NFC North teams are in that same spot. They're all over projected to be over the amount available to spend. So all of the NFC North is in this kind of same boat. So Lions are going to go in. They're going to look at their salary caps. They're going to make their adjustments. The salary cap number will be set by the NFL. And then they're going to set aside a bunch of money for the future. And then they're going to say, all right, this is what we have to spend. This is what our needs are. And because Brad Holmes wants to go into the draft and not be put in a spot where he has to reach for a player where the value doesn't match the pick, he's going to want to try and fill every spot that they need with a starter-capable player. Now, it may not be like an elite player, but it's a guy who could probably give you starts if you needed to. And when you're looking at their roster right now, if let's say they don't re-sign anybody, which is a bit ridiculous because they'll re-sign about half of the guys that are available free agents. That's historically what they do. But if they don't re-sign anybody, they need to have a starter potentially at tackle, like you said, on the edge, at linebacker, and then a nickel. Those are your 4 spots. So those are the 4 areas. And then, obviously center could be an issue as well. But so if you look at those 5 spots, those are the 5 areas they're probably going to be looking at in free agency, and they're going to want to add somebody who can at least start. It doesn't have to be the all-pro like Linderbaum. It could just be like someone who could get them, to a spot where they need to be. And if they don't like the draft in certain areas, then that might be a position they're going to spend more on, right? So if they don't like the centers in this draft class, which I don't think they're great, I don't know if any of them are starter capable, but there's some developable guys, but that might going after a starting center might be high on their priority list. And then, when it comes to tackle, do you want to spend the money on tackle? Some of these tackles in free agency have injury histories, and so do you want to spend that, or do you want to go to the draft where it's a little bit deeper, and you might be able to find a guy on a cheaper salary for a longer period of time at a position of value? And so that's what they're going to be figuring out in that next month. They're going to be finalizing where they're going to attack, how they're going to attack it, where they need to spend their money, how much money they have. Like, all of those things play into a factor, all before we even get to the draft with those, with all those mock draft simulations that, I agree with you. They're a ton of fun to do, but they can be really misleading, and they can set expectations kind of out of whack a little bit as well. So, we'll find out a lot in the next couple of weeks with how the money gets settled, and then from there, they're going to start trying to re-sign their guys. And in free agency, if I'm kind of expecting them to focus, if they're going to get a center, I think that's a spot they might attack in free agency. And I would expect them to find, like I said, a starter-capable edge, a starter-capable linebacker, and maybe a starter-capable nickel.
That was a great summary. I've mentioned the salary cap thing on the show a lot. We're going to have actually a couple salary cap experts that are scheduled to come on in the next few weeks here to talk about that a little bit, because I try to remind people, hey, there's 2 sides to this with the whole spending thing. They just look at Holmes as being tight, but he's also planning for the future too, knowing that he's shelled out a decent amount of contracts that are going to inflate here for some of the homegrown talent. I think it was a great explanation of kind of the free agency goal to, as far as getting some players in that can kind of stem the tide, be holdovers while you continue to develop in-house, which is clearly something they like to do. And they've been decent at acquiring some free agents that weren't necessarily pegged for starting roles, but a guy like Rock Ya-Sin, it makes me think of this year. He wasn't necessarily, he wasn't somebody that people were chomping at the bit to get, but he was great. He ended up being a starter quality player, kind of to your point of that description. So they're going to look for a few guys like that, I think, here in the off season.
I agree. A guy like Rock is the perfect example. He's such a great system fit. You could see it in camp. He just fit in so well. And then when given the opportunity, he played great. if they're able to retain Rock, if they're able to bring back Avante Maddox, their secondary is going to look a little bit. It's going to be stronger by trying to re-add those two players, and then focusing on that secondary becomes a little bit less pressing. And then I expect them to really, hone in on the trenches, on both sides of the ball.
I agree, and that's a great summary. Really appreciate you coming on and taking the time. We'll look forward to hopefully having you back on as this offseason progresses, because, like you said, it's going to have many iterations and it's going to change a lot. So we'd love to get your expertise back on the show here at some point. But be sure to tell people where they can follow you and Pride of Detroit in the meantime.
Oh yeah, I'm on most of the social media stuff. It's just my name. I have an unusual name, Erik with a K, Schlitt, Schlitt, and it's just everything is just at Erik Schlitt. So you can find me on most social medias like that. I'm constantly putting stuff out at Pride of Detroit. We also have Pride of Detroit on all the social medias. And we try to use Pride of Detroit like an encyclopedia, right? An encyclopedia of what's happening in the Lions. So if you're ever wondering, like, hey, what does this move mean? How does this work? How does this go? Or what happened at this stage in week 10 of the Lions last season? We probably have an article for you on it, because we really try and touch on every topic as much as possible.
As we proved in this segment, because I was talking about the too many cooks in the kitchen thing, and Dan, my producer, turned around his phone and showed me a Pride of Detroit article on that. So it's like we're using Chat GPT here and just conjuring things. So, but really appreciate you joining the show, Erik, and we hope to have you back on again soon.
Yeah, of course. I had a lot of fun. It was nice talking to you. Time flew by.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we'll have to do it again, and we'll be following Pride of Detroit in the meantime. So we'll talk to you soon.